Hey, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about how the 2011 became mainstream and kind of a little bit about the history there. I've got a cool gun here. This is a Titan operator. We didn't make these very long. It's a Titan without windows cut out. This is right before optics plates became crazy, but it's got a fixed iron sight. So this is more combat duty version of Titan. We had some folks who are doing law enforcement stuff ask us to build this. This gun's probably from 2017. Back then, the optics weren't really a thing just yet. They were close, but they weren't really. Nobody was using them on duty guns quite yet. And there was a belief system back then that you couldn't have windows in the guns, and because they get dirty and it wouldn't work. And I think people have started to abandon that concept, but. So the history is that, and I love the history of the double stack 2011s or double stack 1911s, whatever. 2011's trademark. So that's a staccato or an STI product, and then double stack 1911s is what the rest of us make. But the history is effectively and don't hold me in all these timelines. I'll be very general with this, but in the late 80s. Competition shooting, people are starting to want more capacity. So the single stack guns aren't getting it done. People are using 1911s because nobody can beat a 1911 trigger. Nobody today has even still surpassed that trigger system. So the double stacks kind of pair ordnance pops up with the double stack 1911. And then the guys from STI and Chip McCormick and those guys are trying to figure out how to make this modular system that they did. And my understanding is, don't hold me to this, Para Ordnance had a patent that said that they made a double stack 1911 basically with a single piece frame, right? So it had continuous rails, and that in the patent is the way it's written, is to my understanding. And again, I'm not a legal expert. A lot of this are stories I've gone and met with a lot of the guys that were around when all this started. So I'm sharing with you what they shared with me. Take it with a grain of salt. I couldn't testify to court that I know all this as a fact, but it seems to mostly check out. Para's got this patent that says that the rails are continuous, one piece rails, just like a 1911, and that the frame and grip are one piece. So to get around that, the other guys make the grip come off, so that's one thing, major difference. And then if you saw the modular system we all build on now, they took the center section of the rails out, which is smart. The center section of the rails really doesn't do anything. There is some rigidity to that, but it does add rigidity, but it's not necessary. So then there's a fight, a legal battle over between those two. So STI forms. That's Virgil Tripp and Sandy Strayer. STI starts making these guns, and they focus for the most part on the competition world. And so why is that? So we're going to talk a little bit about why they couldn't go mainstream with these guns. So somewhere in the 90s, I think late 90s, Sandy Strayer was already out, had gone and started SBI. And since his name was on the patent, he could build these same guns too. So it's just the two. They had a patent. Again, don't fact check me all you want and put in the comments, but I think the patent ran out in 2007. At that point, Virgil had sold STI. He had sold his shares in STI. Dave Skinner had bought them. Dave was a big electronics guy, to my knowledge, in the Texas area. And they just catered. Dave ran the company pretty well, and in Georgetown, Texas, and they catered to the competition guys. Well, the market for competition guys is teeny. It's just so much smaller than the general gun market. And Wilson Combat's playing a little bit in that world, right? And Bill Wilson was born out of that. And then you see Wilson Combat go the other way. They're like, well, we're just going to build high-end guns for guys with dollars and forget about the competition guys, which was when we started Atlas Gunworks. That was really smart. We're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, but we're competition guys, so we start there too. And the market for non-competition guys is 100 times bigger than the competition guys. So that's a smart business thing. And I might be wrong on my history, but my opinion is that Bill Wilson started that trend of, hey, let's pay a lot of money for a nice handgun. So thank you, Bill. I don't think any of this would exist without Bill doing it first. So Bill kind of comes out of the competition thing, and the STI guys stay in there. Para Ordnance is like changing ownership all over. There's a lot going on there, but they're their production's in and out. When I started shooting in the mid 2000s, you couldn't get a para-ordnance gun even if you wanted to. And that was probably a blessing, but regardless, things were going on there. So the STI folks are serving the competitive market, and they're making frames and selling them to gun builders. So there's gun builders building guns on the thing. And then the patent runs out in 07, and then you kind of get a wild west of gun things. So probably the biggest and the first one was Phoenix Trinity pops up. They're making frames. Matt Sheely pops up. And so a bunch of folks pop up and they're making and selling frames with their name on it, and other people can build guns. So now that's your first little bump, that there's some extra capacity, right? Because the guns, again, they weren't being marketed all that well, but the competition world's also getting more busy at that period in time. So there's more demand for competition guns, but it's still mostly competition guns. And we come into the marketplace shortly after that, right? We come into the marketplace in 2014. So there's a handful of people kind of getting into this. But for a minute, it's the Wild West. You got a whole bunch of people making parts, and there's a whole bunch of new players. So the patent's up. People can make frames and copy this. There can be clones, no problem. In that time, STI sells the company into an ESOP, and then they go through 3 or 4 different management, or maybe it's 2 or 3 management groups, and they're not doing well. And what they do well is market, but they're struggling making the guns. And so there's one thing that changed everything, and maybe that should be the subtitle or the secondary title of this thing. And I wish we had done it, and I wish we could take credit for it, but we can't. So we were buying STIs and tuning them in 2015. They had already come out with the DVC line, and the guns are pretty. They're marketing them super well. They're selling them great. They're great selling, but the quality is a little up and down. So good business for us. We were tuning them in the early days. But the guns everyone tuned the guns to not lock back. All the competition guys did that. Now, why did they do that? There's 2 reasons. One, to get an extra round or 2, depending on your caliber. If you run a flat follower, this is the current follower that everybody's using. This is our Gen 3. It just came out in 2024, or is coming out this summer in 2024. But the competition followers, I don't have one in front of us, is just super flat. So you get an extra round or 2. So that's one reason. But the main reason is the lockback never worked. I can't tell you how many hours with the original lockback followers with the old STI Gen 1 tubes. They were the only ones making tubes really back then with lockback followers. They just didn't work. The SVIs didn't work either. So you could spend a week tuning these. They work for 2 days, then they wouldn't work anymore. So if you called us in 2016 or 17 and asked for a lockback gun, we just said no. It just said it's not possible, because that was the truth. You could set it up, get it working, and then it would pretty quickly not be consistently working. And so it did 2 things. One is you run the gun all the way, they close and not lock back, and then sometimes they'd lock back with 1 round in them. And the mags, that's still kind of something the mags need a little bit of tuning sometimes around those 2 things. But someone at STI, before they became Staccato, developed this style follower, and it's flared at the bottom. So we come in, if you look at the top and bottom, it flares. And what's super cool about this is as it comes up the mag tube, it bellies up left and right. And this spot on the follower that catches the lockback is always in the same place. And now, with that design, you can get the guns to consistently lock back. The mag tubes also, this is when STI released the Gen 2 mag tubes. And I'm not going to be exactly clear on what year that is, but it was probably 2016, maybe 2017. But that was an absolute game changer. So STI was suffering with some other problems, like the springs weren't that great and the tubes were inconsistent, and there were some other things. But fast forward to 2024, there's a handful of people making tubes, us included. So we have our own complete mags that are all proprietary, and we keep an evolution of this going. So in 2.5 or 3, we made mags for 3 or 4 years. We're on our 3rd generation of followers. So little tweaks that, Gen 2 ones are great. They work awesome, but the Gen 3 ones have a little more range of what kind of tube they'll work in. We try to always cross-compat them with other people's tubes as well. So usually they'll help with other folks' tubes as well. But that was a game changer. So now what you got to remember is the average consumer, which is 100 times bigger pool than the competitive guys, has to have lockback, because their Glocks and their SIGs and whatever else, their Canics, whatever they're shooting, they all lock back and they want it. And the law enforcement guys want to lock back and whatever. And a lot of the operator guys want to lock back. So all of a sudden you have mags that work. And in that time, the STI groups were failing over, and the management groups are failing over and over. They brought in some guys from Benelli and a couple other places, and it wasn't working. They brought some Brownells folks in at one point, and it just didn't work. They weren't running the business well. So the group that owns STI now buys STI, rebrands them Staccato. They make some additional upgrades into the process or whatever, and much improve the making of the guns. But what those guys are super good at is marketing. So now you've got a company that was focused on making 10,000 guns or less a year and frames for other people, and now they're not making any frames for other people, and there's a whole bunch of other groups doing that. And then there's companies like us that popped up and now make their own frames and own products all in-house. And then the Staccato folks go out and market this, and then their avenue was the more law enforcement and hero marketing. And now they're I make up numbers, but let's say they sell 50,000 guns this year, and they're probably on their way to 100,000 guns in the next couple of years. And again, I don't have those numbers. Those are heard it on the street numbers, but that's super cool, right? Everybody's like, oh, you should be afraid Staccato's doing this. We're like, hey, look, we're the top side of the thing. We're great. Go do that. We want people to shoot these guns. We love these guns. It didn't work before this follower. So I have no idea who did that at STI back in the day, but it was the single biggest game changer in the double stack complete market. Again, I wish it was our idea, but it wasn't. And so fast forward another couple years, the Staccato brand gets rebranded, and they're going through that process. And then all of a sudden there's a market here, and Springfield takes notice, and the Prodigy pops up. And so now we've got a whole bunch of price points. So every year at SHOT Show, this happened in the last 3 years, there's 5 or 6 new companies trying to do these. And most of them probably disappear here in the next couple of years, but some of them are going to stay. And Springfield had a rough patch with the Prodigy in the very front, but they bought those guns pretty dialed in. That's a lot of gun for $1,500, but we're fans of all of them. Right. And our goal is to, if you have a Prodigy, we'll sell you parts and mags to make the gun better. And if you have a Staccato and you need that too, we'll do that there. And someday, a certain percentage of folks will want to become Atlas customers. And honestly, we're so oversold that we're rooting for everyone else to do a good job and expand those things. But you took a gun that was so narrowly marketed and function wise didn't fit the bill to the general shooting population, and you get some new ownership groups in a couple different places, and someone designs a magazine and a follower, but mostly the follower, that it's a game changer, because so now we have lockback, and the lockback barrier is removed, and then now we've got some companies with some real marketing chops doing marketing, and all of a sudden the platform blows up. And why? It's awesome, right? There's single action, double action, striker guns. We like all the guns, right? I'm not here to say one thing's better than another, but for the simple fact that the trigger system in the 1911 can't be beat, and you get that with a double stack setup, it's almost impossible to argue with. It's awesome. And then if you looked at this gun, right? Our guns are modular guns, much like the STI guns. Were designed to beat that para patent. The guns that are modular have a little bit different flex pattern to them. The guns all flex a little bit when you shoot them. And it actually ultimately makes, for example, 9mm, you have an aluminum grip, steel frame, steel slide, and a certain, we like 4.6-inch for most shooters. But the way the guns flex in return, you actually get a little bit of recoil dampening and a little bit of return help in the way the guns flex. Put a plastic grip on that gun, it's a different pattern, right? Might be good, might be bad, but everybody kind of has their own we have our own secret sauces here that we like. So we're always testing those sort of things, but there is something to be said for a modular frame where I can take this grip off and change it without changing the frame, right? And the frame has a lot of fitting to it, and the grip has some, but much less. So that's a little bit of the history of how these double stacks are now probably a 200,000 gun a year market worldwide versus what they were 20,000, I would say, back to the early 2010s. So it's a 10x. The market's 10x. And if you don't have one, they're super awesome. They're my favorite gun on the planet. Hard to argue with a good single action with that 1911 trigger. That's just amazing. Hope to see you all in the range soon.